You're on a roll. Ribble, you're rolling.
I'm rolling Ribble. Well, I was usually Raymond Ribble who double dribbled, so...
Oh no, there's so many ways I could go with it.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax, HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to episode 14 of HelpMeWithHIPAA.com. Today I am super excited to introduce Ray Ribble of All Medical Solutions. And today we're going to be discussing what AMS is up to with a product they have on the market called SPHER. And I'm really excited to welcome Ray. So Ray, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into AMS and SPHER.
All right. Well, hi, guys. How you doing? A little bit about me. I guess I've got an interesting past. My origins are here in California on the west coast of the United States, but I was raised in the Midwest, so I'm actually from a small town that people haven't heard of called Detroit, Michigan. That's where I was raised. I got my degree in aeronautical engineering, and through hook and by crook, after working in the aerospace industry for a while, I was offered an invitation to go to Japan with the Japanese government as on a fellowship. Went over there. Long story short, spent 13 years living in Japan, speak the language fluently, and co-founded a company called Fusion Systems back in 1992. We took that company, built it to a fairly large organization doing systems integration and delivering solutions for multinational firms from all around the world, and sold the company in 99. Started some other investments and started to become what we call today a serial entrepreneur. Restarted Fusion because we loved it so much the first time we decided to do it again, and built Fusion, which still exists today. We're in our 10th year now. We have offices in Tokyo, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, and Los Angeles, where I'm sitting. And here in LA, that is All Medical Solutions. So we acquired a firm here about 4.5 years ago that was heavily involved in the healthcare industry. And we kept the name that they had, All Medical Solutions, even though it is a division of Fusion Systems. What we do is we work together very closely with the HITECH program. And I believe both of you are familiar with the HITECH program.
Yes.
All right. So we were selected as the service provider for both the Los Angeles Regional Extension Center and the Orange County Regional Extension Center, and had the responsibility of helping those providers to select their EHR, implement that EHR, and then obviously go through meaningful use and meet all the criteria that was involved in that for the last 4 years. We've now implemented over 2,000 systems for clients across Southern California. We're quite proud of that, and I think we finished with the third highest conversion rate across the United States in terms of our interaction with our providers. So when we said we were going to get something done, I think we did a great job of delivering. That was my plug there, right? And and as a byproduct of doing that, and I guess this is what we're talking about today. So we were working with our clients here in Southern California. We obviously tried to push them to do their security risk assessments, which was very important. At the time we got into our third year, and we had delivered over 1,500 meaningful use attestations at that point. Not one single organization had had completed their security risk assessment as part of the meaningful use requirements. We became very concerned that that was going to be a problem, and if the ONC or CMS were to come back and start auditing, as everybody was telling us they were going to do, that our providers were going to get in trouble. And we started looking at what was missing from that component, and what was glaring in the headlights there was the fact that nobody was monitoring user activity within their system. The EHR companies all do a great job of providing the audit logs, if you know how to find them, in their system. But what do you do with them once you've got them? And can you actually read the data that's being put out? Because it's very codified, depending on which manufacturer we're speaking of, the software companies. Can you understand that, oh, this is an anomaly, or this is somebody looking at something they're not supposed to? Even something as simple as snooping. How would you know somebody's snooping? If you looked at a record, could you tell that? We felt the answer was no. Pulling back into the company that I co-founded, Fusion Systems, I started talking with my software developers. And I told them about what the problem was, and I said, what I really would like to do is build something that could automate this process for our clients in Southern California. I wasn't thinking national at that point. I was just thinking about some type of let's call it a widget that could be used. And my original idea was something that would be hardware-based that could monitor those files for the clients and make sure that they were compliant. That was really the basis of the idea for creating Sphere. We've gone much further since then. And I guess I should stop right there. And I'm talking too much.
Hey, we like an episode we don't have to work. So let's talk about real quick, because just to focus on what HIPAA standards that Sphere addresses, because the security rule has very specific requirements that Sphere is there to help and it provides. But let's drill down just a little bit to those two standards that are most important for Sphere's functionality. Sure. What's the word I'm looking for?
Compliant.
We say security standards.
There you go.
I think that's where you're going, right?
Yep.
There are two that we focus on, and I'm not sure if people have brought others to our attention, and there are others that are peripheral. But the ones that we kind of talk about on our website and that we bring to the attention is 164.308, which basically says information system activity review, and the ability to have a process of a policy and procedure in place that reasonably and regularly allows you to check what's happening in terms of the usage of your system. And then 164.312B, which is the audit controls and making sure that you have implemented, along with your hardware and software, procedural mechanisms that will allow you to record and examine that activity and make sure you know what's happening in your environment. Is that consistent with your understanding?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I wanted to get to, is that there's two very important pieces. And what happens is most people, when they're addressing those standards, they only think about the network access. They only think about what's happening in their firewalls and their server access, not the EHR itself. And this kind of blends more. It's another blending of HIPAA and the meaningful use standards, because part of meaningful use is being able to know what's going on. That's why those logs are being generated. It's required under certified EHRs, right?
Correct. That's an ONC certification that they require, yes. If they want to be certified by ONC, the Office of the National Coordinator, then they must adhere to those rules.
Right. So all EHRs generate this log, and people can manually go through and do manual audits if they want to. But how are you going to catch the ones that are the problems and the audits of like VIPs and those kind of things? Okay, well, that might be a little bit more logical, but you don't know if somebody's looking at the workforce member, the person working with them, or their neighbor, and all of those kind of things when they have no business in there.
Well, let me throw something at you right there. We get hit with this question all the time, and it's probably one of the hardest questions to answer is, everybody wants to know about snooping. Snooping is, they believe, one of the largest violations that takes place in the industry. And you just hit on it with the VIP monitoring that a lot of the companies can do. Epic and Cerner, for instance, both have a VIP module. But Donna, your last name is Grindle, correct?
Yes.
Do you have sisters or brothers with the last name that's the same?
Yes.
Have any of your sisters gotten married?
Yes.
And they changed their last name when they got married?
Yes.
So how's that system supposed to know that's your sister you're looking at?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. And that is the problem. Everybody talks about, I want to know if Grindle's looking at Grindle or Ribble's looking at Ribble. Yeah, but guess what? I have siblings who are not the same sex who might have changed their names. How are you going to know?
Yeah, it's more of, if I'm not even in that job, if I'm in, say, the front desk area, and this is a person that only comes through hospital connections for some reason, an ER maybe, front desk person shouldn't necessarily be looking at it. And so there's some areas where you can evaluate it. But in most of those cases, my experience is either people are fine with it or a complaint is filed. And most people, it's those complaints that come up with the snooping where it is the siblings. The big thing would be other workforce members. And that is a huge issue. And you should be able to say, I want to know anybody that looked at other workforce members.
That is correct. And so what we built into our application was the ability to look at an individual actor we call the actors are the employees in the organization. We track their workflow patterns. And so what we're really looking to do is establish a baseline of what does Ray Ribble look like over a 60-day period of time. And then we synthesize that 60 days in our algorithm, and then we compare it against today's activity. And what we know is that Ray is probably a creature of habit. Mm-hmm. He is going to do similar things on a day-to-day basis. And while he might step out of bounds to the left or to the right a little, he's not going to do something drastically different. And if he does, we should be able to identify what that was and identify very quickly what it was. And if we can't, hey, maybe it wasn't Ray. Maybe that was somebody who got Ray's password and they're doing something. So the easiest thing for us to track is workflow. And
Right.
This is why we built our product the way we did, using algorithms and a pattern recognition algorithm per se, because we didn't want to be tied to a specific rule that says, oh, in the event they work 9 to 5, tell me if they do something after 5. Because guess what? In the medical industry, in the healthcare industry, people doing things out of bounds is, yes, all the time. Things change, a patient's sick, you got to stay later. So that's not a good way of monitoring activity. What you really want to have is a range, and allow that range to change over time so that you can talk to the system. The system will remember you told it that here's an activity that took place, and I think that activity actually is a normal activity. Please remember that for next time. So Sphere learns this, right? And then it'll know next time that, oh, that's not that strange, so I'm not going to issue you a bunch of false positive readings about this activity because it's consistent with something else they did over the last 60 days.
Yeah. So first of all, I did notice that you said that you would ask the computer, please. And I love that.
We have to be nice.
Well, people think that the nicer you are to the computer, the less it will torture you. But having been, a background in programming, I totally understand that concept of if you write the rules and, you write a program exactly the way someone asks you to write it, following the rules they ask you to do, and then they do something outside the rules and the program doesn't function properly, well, that's not within the rules that you gave me. So that, I think, is a big difference that sets your product apart from a lot of the other products in this particular market. And can you speak to that behavioral differences in your product versus the rules product?
Yeah. So when we started, I told you a story at the beginning there about wanting to help our patients, our clients, and their patients really. And we went out and we spent $25,000 on a very popular SIEM-based technology. So security information event management system. And
okay, that's another big acronym for our listeners to not worry about. What that meant is it's a system that read the logs and tried to figure things out.
Right, at the network level.
Yeah.
At the network level.
At the nerd level.
So we thought, let's use this piece of technology and we'll deploy it for all of our clients at a very small cost, and we can monitor what's going on. The problem we ran into is it only looks at the network. It didn't look at the application. And when we go back to that previous question that Donna put in front of us about the HIPAA requirements and also the meaningful use requirements, it didn't specifically address those requirements. So we kind of wasted $25K, and that led us to looking at what else we can do. There are a number of rules-based solutions that are on the market. They're very good products, and God bless them, they've done a great job. But when we looked at that technology, myself and the guys who were on my team kept looking at it and saying, yeah, but there's a lot of limitations to rules. And maybe it's because we were developers. That's why we said, rules don't always work. We need something that's more fluid. We need something that's more dynamic. And we needed something, and I kept saying, I'd love to have artificial intelligence in this. I wanted to learn as we go. So Radek, who's my chief developer, came back to me and he showed me the work that he did on his degree, which was in pattern recognition. To give you an idea, you both are using a Visa card or a MasterCard. Pattern recognition is the same type of algorithm that the major credit card companies use to track your movement and make sure that somebody hasn't stolen your credit card. So they'll find an anomaly in that usage pattern, and they'll call you and ask you, hey, Donna, did you just buy 100 gallons of gas in Peoria, Illinois?
Oh, yeah. They called me one time. They said, look, you bought gas, $50 of gas this morning, and at 2 o'clock you're buying $50 of gas 5 miles away. That doesn't seem right. Is that right?
That's exactly what they do. By the way, the number one testing mechanism when they steal your credit card is to buy gas.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I had a long discussion with the people at Visa. And so, because I really wanted to research whether or not we were going down the right path or not. So the people at Visa have found through their own analysis that what they'll do is once they've stolen a card, they need to test it to make sure the card will work. So they'll go to a gas station and buy somewhere between $10 and $50 worth of gas. If the card works, they immediately pass that through their network to somebody else who walks into Walmart and starts buying $100 Visa prepaid cards. Right?
Wow.
Right? And,
now I know how to do it.
And but the gas.
Did you hear David? Now
yes,
I did.
David's going to be hanging up soon. He's got another job. So we looked at that, and when we said, oh, that's kind of the way that we want to go. And so we went down this path of pattern recognition. We also wanted something, a core requirement we had was in the healthcare industry, especially at the private practice level and the clinical level. The costs for IT are horrendous and very difficult for those organizations to bear versus, say, a major hospital group or a health plan group. So that was one of our criteria. It was to build an ineffective but high-level technology solution. So with our product, Sphere, there's nothing that you install and there's no software to maintain. So we basically took all of that off the board. So everything is SaaS-based. So it's in the cloud, as they say. And we take full responsibility for all the upgrades. We take full responsibility for the deployment of the system, and we don't pass any of those costs on to our clients.
And the security.
And the security. Oh, great point. Yeah. So that was a huge consideration, which had nothing to do with us, but selecting a partner where we would host that environment was critical to us. A very major organization who I won't name had made some promises about what they could do for us. And when we got audited, because we've been audited, we found out that they had actually lied to us, and we weren't in a HIPAA compliant environment. We were in some third-party data center off-site that they had passed us to without telling us. Wow. And so when it came to the security level, we failed our own audit. So I rectified that really quick, and now we're partners with a company called ClearData out of Phoenix, Arizona. ClearData is a 100% healthcare-focused organization, and every client that they have and everything they do is wrapped around HIPAA compliance and protecting that information in terms of the data that resides on their servers. And since we've gone together with them and have checks and everything, it's been just a great relationship, and we're real proud of that.
Sounds good. So you talked, Ray, about Sphere basically takes the audit logs from the EHR. Is that right?
That is correct.
And is it able to do this for EHR in the cloud as well as local? Does it matter?
It really does not matter. That's the right type of question to ask. And the predominance of the EHRs in America are cloud-based themselves. So the offices around the United States are all basically communicating with the cloud. That's where the server is sitting. So what we do is we have two ways of getting that log data. The easiest and the most efficient is if it's automated, meaning that we are allowed to install a script which will do a call to that environment, that EHR environment. And every morning, it'll ask for the audit logs. The EHR will provide those audit logs, and then it automatically gets uploaded into Sphere, and Sphere starts doing what it does, which is to review that. But in most cases, it's not that easy. And so what the client is required to do is every morning they come in. We teach them as part of the onboarding process how to go in and find those files, where to put them. So we actually help them to set up a specific directory on their system where they can store the files and then upload those into Sphere. And Sphere has this one page with a big giant button on it that says, drop your files here. And that was designed by the users, by the way. And it's that simple. They just click, they actually can drag the file in, drop it in there, and that's it. They're done. So total time usually for them to do their daily upload, less than 5 minutes.
Okay. So it grabs the audit log, and then from there, Sphere takes a look at it and puts it against its algorithms and looks for suspicious behavior. So what happens next? Let's say Sphere finds some activity. What happens?
Then you would receive an alert notice. So you get an email telling you that Sphere has identified an event that needs to be investigated. And the clock starts running there. Maybe we need to add that as well. And Donna, maybe you can speak to this. But the clock starts running because at the moment that you have identified an event or an incident or a breach, the clock is ticking from both a state level and a federal level in terms of notification. Because if it is a breach, you have to let people know, right?
Yeah, we just did an episode on breach response plans. So
did you?
Ties
okay.
perfectly.
That ties right into it. So Sphere will send an alert email to that individual. They will click on the link. There's nothing in there that tells them what it is. Obviously, from a security perspective, we don't want to put anything even relating to PHI in that email. Just you need to go to Sphere and investigate an event that's been identified. They will go in, they log into their dashboard. As soon as they get into the first page of the dashboard, it will show them all of the recent alerts, the ones that they have in progress, because maybe they're still doing some investigations, but also the newest ones. And then they have the ability to go in there and drill down, investigate that, look at the log file if they need to within the entire system. We don't make them leave Sphere. So we have that log already. So it's there. They can review the log. But we give them a very easy, single pane environment that they can see all of the metadata associated with why the system identified that as anomaly. It could be hour of access, time of access. They stepped outside of their workflow. It could be suspicious number of logins, so on and so forth. The system will actually tell them why it identified that event and what it thinks it could be. And then they can do the investigation and determine if that's normal or not normal, permitted or not permitted.
And when you talk about things like metadata and all that, that gets a little intimidating to some people. But the way that the application presents it is human readable, obvious stuff, right?
What we actually did is remember who our clients are. You know, they're running private practices and clinics more so than major hospitals. So when we worked with our focus group, that was a design requirement up front, was to make sure the first thing they read is something, it's a sentence. It's one sentence that says, this happened at this time from this person with this account, and here's what we think you should do. And it's that simple and spelled out. And then below that is that data, and it says, when did it occur? Then when did Sphere identify it as occurring? Because that's when the clock starts. Who was the patient? Who was the individual in the organization that we believe created this anomaly? And then also it tells you what system it's from. Many of our clients are using more than one system. They might have two EHRs for whatever reason. They could be running a practice management system. They could be running a billing system. They could have a PACS system. So it could be from 1, 2, 3, 4 different systems that we're monitoring on their behalf. So they want to know what system is this from, because that will also tell them whether or not that person even belonged in that environment, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then from there, they can drill down on that and look at any additional information that helps them to make a decision.
So that's a good point that you just hit on there about all the different systems. If the systems can create the logs,
we can read it.
It doesn't really matter what the system is, right?
That is correct. That is absolutely. Let's go back to David's point early on. If the ONC has certified that application, then Sphere can read the audit log because the ONC has predetermined what that audit log needs to be formatted in.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you've got something that really is filling a gap that many people don't even know they have, or they're trying to do it manually. Most of the people we work with, they say, well, we're going to try to do it manually and random audits and those kind of things. But that's hard to say that you're going to catch all of the things that you should and be able to be proactive when you have a problem going on and you can prevent some of these big problems from happening. So with your tool, you've aimed it at you mentioned that most of your clients are the private practices and those kind of things, not the big hospitals. And many tools are designed for the hospitals first. Mm-hmm. And then if you can afford it, you can use it in the private practice world or the clinics. Mm-hmm. So if you have a small environment, it's still something that they could look at your product, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, we designed it with small practices in mind. We're not limited to small practices, so we now have sold Sphere together with our partners. We've sold Sphere everywhere from a single practice provider all the way up to a major hospital, and it's the same Sphere. There's nothing different. So you're getting the same value that MLK Hospital here in Los Angeles is getting if you're Dr. Ribble in Los Angeles as well. And all the functionality that they want, we build in. So we don't limit it. We don't say, oh, let's give this part to these guys, but not give it to them because, they're paying us more. We don't look at it that way. We want to make sure that everything's there so that our doctors, our providers, our users have the best technology available. And if it's working the right way, they don't even have to mess around with Sphere too much. Sphere should be unobtrusive. Sphere should be something that takes no more than 5 to 15 minutes a day max for you to do an investigation. And we have some clients that they may not even touch Sphere for a week to 2 weeks at a time, which means that they're doing things right. And there's no problem with that.
Right. It's not giving them anything to worry about.
That's
it's not
correct.
that they're ignoring things. Let's be clear.
Yes.
That clock is ticking. Don't ignore it when it tells you, but it's not telling you anything you need to worry about.
That's right. And, that's the way you want it to be, right? The key underlying motivation here is improve the patient experience in the office, right? As we move,
care comes first.
That's right. That should be the core. Even as a technology company, that's one of our core philosophies. Because at the end of the day, what do? We service providers and try to make them more efficient in how they service their patients through the use of technologies. So we want to make the EHR run the way they want it to run. And then subsequent to that, we want to protect that environment so that they don't end up on the 6 o'clock news for a major breach.
Yeah. We talked about the joy of being on the news when you open the door in the morning and there's a camera there going, hey, why were you looking at somebody's record?
Exactly.
No, nothing. I didn't know why I know it.
Well, I can tell you a couple of interesting stories that go with that. We just had, I can't use names obviously, but we had one client, and actually, this is from your neck of the woods too. We have one client that has about 190 providers using our system. They monitor all of those on an ongoing basis. They had an employee that they had fired 3 years ago trying to get into the EHR system in the middle of the night. And because the employee had been gone for such a long time, they really didn't think about her. So these attempts to get into the system weren't detected by the network trafficking. But Sphere captured the events and brought them to the attention of the security officer because of the failed attempts to enter. And it showed each time the actual timestamp that it happened. And then that security officer was able to sit down with somebody on the technology side and look at the IP address of where that was coming from. And they were able to determine the login they were trying to use, who that individual was.
Wow.
So it all started with a very simple Sphere alert. That turned into an event. It wasn't a breach. There was no breach that occurred. So Sphere doesn't always lead to a breach. That's one thing I always like to tell people. Yeah. But it created a level of awareness for that organization that, hey, you know what? We got to be watching what's going on. Just because we fired them, just because they're gone, doesn't mean that there's isn't some danger there. And it's unfortunate. Sometimes it is people that we trust that will do these things. But we have to be diligent in our observations of what's happening within our networks.
Indeed. And that is just a reminder to the technical people of don't think just because your network's telling you things that you're catching everything. So, and that's another reason that you should be doing these audits in some way. And whether you're doing them manually or, with a random kind of audit and going through what the EHRs are giving you and the other systems that are giving you, or you're using a tool like Sphere, there's a great deal of value of having that tool, particularly in a small environment, because the cost of Sphere is likely not the cost of an individual that it would require to fully manage all of this information and audit it appropriately, I would say.
I would agree with that. And if I could add to that, Donna, the nice thing about Sphere is Sphere looks at 100% of your audit logs. Let's be honest. First of all, we probably don't have the patience, and we clearly don't have the time to sit down and start looking at audit logs for all the day's activities. And you talked about that. We did the analysis on that. And to look at just 20% of the audit logs that a small practice generates in a day, which would be about 3,000 to 5,000 records, it would take you somewhere in the range of about 5 hours to do that. So if you're paying somebody, say, $15 an hour, that adds up pretty fast. That's going to be expensive. But guess what? You're not looking at 20%. You want to look at 100% of what's happening. And that's where Sphere becomes very cost effective because Sphere is typically going to cost you $100 or less, and that's for the whole month, and that covers all your systems. So we don't say, oh, for each system it's $100 or something like that. It is $100, and that's everything that you have running. So if you buy a new system after you bought Sphere, we throw that on there. There's no additional cost. So we're trying to make this very, very financially effective for our clients. We understand that they have constraints in terms of what they can spend. So we tried to build a piece of technology that bends and weaves with their business as well.
Well, aren't you such a nice person?
Hey, thank you very much.
I just want to say, wow. I mean, I really thought this was going to be a much more expensive solution. That's crazy. I want to buy that. Just put it on my home network.
Yeah, with all your kids.
I know. What are y'all doing?
So I've had people tell me, I think you're charging way too little for this product and you should be charging a lot more money. But those people typically are more financially inclined, and they're not working in the industry, and they haven't been out there doing meaningful use for 4 years and understand a lot of the constraints that the medical institutions have.
Yeah,
so it's easy to just
this giant pile of money, and
right.
They don't understand. Patient care should come first, so why don't we spend some money on that?
Yeah,
but we do need to say though that that's not $100 for a 14 provider clinic. So
no, that is per provider. That is per provider. That's correct. Yeah, and I still think it's a very effective cost, and we built a pricing model around that. That is something they already know, because we use the same pricing model that the EHR companies use, a lot less, by the way, but the same pricing model, so that when they look at that vis-a-vis what they already have in place with their EHR company, we're not trying to do something different. We made it so that it was kind of KISS, keep it simple, stupid, so that when they look at that, they can just say, oh yeah, this fits. I know how this is going to fit into my budget. I know where the payments are going to go. And I also understand from protecting our practice here or our clinic how this is going to work.
You know, Ray, I was just on a LinkedIn discussion last week, I believe, where somebody had started a discussion around how do you find anomalies within your logs. And I started laughing because I knew that we had an interview coming up with you. And but that's what the lady was saying, was that their fellow doctor's office had a breach, and basically it was something that it showed up in the logs, but nobody was reading the logs. No. And so, and the question she put out there basically was, who has the time to do this, or who has the resources to do it? And even if we did sit down and look at the logs, how do we even know that what we're looking at is an anomaly?
Yeah.
So I think you have an amazing solution.
Oh, thank you. You know, I tell you what's hard, what people don't realize is that the logs themselves, the ONC really didn't put any criteria in how the log is published. So they know what fields they have to publish, but it doesn't say how they have to be read. So we have some companies that publish a PDF. We have some that give us, a kind of an Excel file, and then we get things in between that. We don't care. But for the end user, for the provider or the office manager who's given the task of reading that log, the systems are typically very codified. So it's a series of numbers that relates to a patient. So now I have to pull out a second file and say, 00198, who is that? Oh, that's Donna Grindle. Now I got to remember every time I see that's Donna Grindle, right? And then I can't do that. I'll lose interest in that real fast, right? But Sphere can read all of that. And typically, let's say a small office, Sphere is finished with its evaluation of that office in about 10 minutes for the entire day's session. So we capture a 24-hour segment. It reviews that in about 10 minutes. And so as it's reviewing that during that 10 minutes, any of the alerts, David, this goes to your question earlier, it'll start sending alerts as it identifies any of those. So you could end up with maybe 2 or 3 emails from the Sphere system in the morning, and each one of them will be directing you to another alert, another event that it identified, because it sends the emails to you as it identifies them. Basically, that part of it is kind of real time.
Okay.
Oh, sweet.
So as far as the implementation goes, this is a question that I get asked sometimes around technology when somebody says, okay, we need XYZ. And the next question, usually the next question, how much is it going to cost? But the third question is, how much time is it going to take to implement this? Yeah. And are we going to have any downtime?
Can you do it tomorrow?
Yeah. You got 30 minutes during lunch. Can you do this?
Well, I can honestly say no to 30 minutes. I apologize to anybody who's looking for that. But if we already support the EHR in question, so if it was NextGen or Optum, we're working together with a partner right now to implement Greenway. So if it's one of the major systems, we've probably already got it covered. Let's say it's a new technology that we just haven't come across, a new EHR, then typically it takes us about 3 to 4 weeks to do all the work on our side before we can come back to you and turn it on. And what you have to do with us is just provide us with 2 months, that's 60 days, right, audit logs, so that we can establish the baseline for all of your employees. And if you have any third-party business associates that you allow access to your system, they'll be within those logs. And we want to capture all that data, establish that baseline so that we can start measuring against that on go live. So I would say in the best case scenario we've done was 2 days where we already had the system. The customer was totally ready to go with us. They sent us everything. We plugged it in, bam, 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 it was all working. And 2 days later, we went live. 4 days is more the average. And then if it's a brand new system, about 4 weeks.
So you mentioned 60 days. Could you go back longer if you wanted?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I totally missed that one. Thank you, Donna. Here's an issue. This brings up an issue from a HIPAA compliance and also from an audit perspective. In the world of meaningful use with the high-tech program, if you get audited, the auditor can choose to go back to the day that you accepted your incentive money, because that's when you attested to say that you were doing all these things and you were monitoring systems. So one of the things that most of the organizations get dinged on is that they haven't implemented any type of user activity monitoring solution from the day that they received their incentive funds. So the fines can start from that day to today. If you started taking money in 2011, 2012 to today, you not only have to give everything you took back, you also get fined for every day of activity in between that. That's scary, right?
Sweet.
So with Sphere, we have this conversation with every client up front. If they have access to all of those audit logs, and if they choose, we will transgress. We'll go back to that day one for them. Now, that's going to take much longer, and that is a little bit labor intensive. But we can load all of those files starting from that day and then going forward. So in that case, David, it might take us about a month to get to the go live with today's activities, because what we're going to be doing is uploading, gigabytes of historical data, because we can't start today and then go backwards because everything will be an anomaly. We have to start from that first day. So this is part of our onboarding where we ask that question. Would you like to start from day one? And if the answer is yes, then our team has a different roadmap that we follow to get that customer live. But we can do both. If they want to start 2 years ago and move forward, that's all part of the same fee.
Okay, so you don't charge extra for that?
We do not.
Well, I think that you have a very spot-on solution to fill in a gap, again, that many people either they don't realize, as David's discussion on LinkedIn reflected, or they have no idea how to do it, which it also reflected. So in getting people started, if you are interested in the Sphere solution, we're going to have the a link to the solution on the helpmewithhipaa.com show notes. You can find them there. And you can also just, call Ray. We'll also put his home phone number on there. And
oh, boy.
You can call Ray and say, hey, tell me about Japan. I want to hear you speaking Japanese.
He works early in the morning, so he prefers you call at 3 a.m.
Yeah, 3 a.m.
And he will be sleeping. Wonderful. I'm turning red with joy over this.
Yeah. Well, at least it's with joy.
Whoever she is.
Now I'm in trouble.
Yeah. There you go.
So, Ray, one thing I like to ask people a lot of times is there's always what we call FAQs, or frequently asked questions, but there's also things that we probably should have asked, the SAQs, the should have asked questions. So what kind of questions should somebody have asked you or one of your sales reps about Sphere that we haven't covered?
I think you've really done a great job. Typically, they ask us, what are the options? What are my options? Is an option to do nothing? And it is an option. That's the worst part of this. You can do nothing and say that you're going to observe your logs manually, as Donna described earlier. Unfortunately, we get bogged down with that thing called patient care and focused on doing that, and that's what we should be doing. So we're not going to do this. And, the young ladies and the guys working for you in your office have a mountain of paperwork and insurance forms that they have to file and co-pays and Obamacare. And are they really going to stop to start examining user files? So that becomes a huge issue. It's not top of mind awareness, but God forbid you do get audited. The auditor is going to identify user activity monitoring and the audit controls as a major discrepancy, and you're going to end up getting fined. And for a very nominal fee, working together with us and our partners, we can solve that problem for you and put you way ahead in the game. So that tends to be one of the conversations that we have, or what are my options? Is doing nothing an option? Right now in today's world, the powers that be at Health and Human Services, the ONC, CMS, OCR, none of them are talking about this issue. Everybody's talking about protecting PHI, but nobody's talking about what can you do to protect it outside of sitting there and reading a piece of paper. And that conversation, I'm obviously sitting on that hill and I'm waving a flag trying to get everybody's attention. But more and more people, like what you're doing today, need to make people aware there are solutions that they can use that have been designed specifically for their markets. So that's one area. Other popular questions is probably, I brought it up earlier, and that is with regard to how do I know if one of my employees is looking at a relative or a friend's file? That's probably the most complex problem to solve. We are looking at developing an additional algorithm. We'll do that, but the problem we have is quite simply there's no way for us to know who your relative is. If you step out of your workflow, this is where we'll catch you 99.999% of the time, is when Ray goes in and I'm like, oh, my best buddy's wife is in here for an examination. I'm going to go look at her file. Well, she's not part of my workflow. And when I log in, I go directly to her file. Well, that's not how I use the system. And as soon as I go directly to her file, that's going to flag the system. Sphere is going to identify that as an anomaly. They're going to bring that up when the security officer sits down with me and says, Ray, can you explain to me why you looked at this file? I'm going to be a humada. Yeah, I made a mistake. Yeah, but you stayed on that file for 35 seconds. That was a long mistake. Right? The question should lead them to the conclusion that you were snooping. And that's how they're catching them. It doesn't sound very sophisticated. It isn't, but it's nice that there's some way that you can get to that conclusion and protect your patients, protect your practice. Remember, this is also about protecting a business. These doctors, this is their business. This is what they do for their livelihood. And we're trying to protect them as well. So I think that becomes a big topic of discussion when we meet with them. Yeah.
Well, the technology term that I would use for all this is really cool. That's some very cool stuff.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I know. I know Donna's probably over there drooling, with all this technology stuff that's going on.
So. Oh, that's why she's drooling. I wasn't sure.
Well, she's looking at your picture as well, I'm sure.
So Ray, growling but not drooling. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Ray, we both really, really appreciate you coming on with us today and telling us about yourself and AMS and Sphere. And I can't tell you enough how good it has been to talk with you and discuss your solution. And I'm really hopeful that you'll come back on with us again down the road and tell us more about what Sphere is doing and how it's taken over the marketplace.
We hope we have good stories to tell. And thank you so much for having me today. I hope I covered the things that you wanted to do and I didn't get too boring with the technology side of stuff.
No, we loved it.
Well, we get excited about technology.
Well, now I know why you're drooling. Okay.
Hey, you're dribbling.
It's a personal problem, please. No, but hey, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we're doing, and hopefully for your listeners, this is meaningful for them. Yes, the information will be on the site then, and if you want to reach out to me, or I imagine Donna can help you as well, or David, but we're happy to answer your questions. And if you want to see what the product looks like and get a private demonstration, we're more than happy to do that. We have a team of people who are prepared to talk to you, and we'll talk about your environment. So don't hesitate to ask questions. We're here to help.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for listening today. And let me remind you that we are at helpmewithhipaa.com. You can also go to iTunes and get this podcast there. And we do ask that you take a minute and just leave a review if you like today's podcast. Don't leave anything less than a 5-star review and tell us how much we loved it. And we'll see all of you next time. Take care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.